All right.
This
So I mean,
meeting is being
we've
recorded.
kind of like started recording now. So yeah, I'll say like an informal like thought I was having, and then I want to actually kind of get into like a thought like on the text. All the thoughts are about the text. Is that the first one is I get it. It's fun to say swears. It's fun to swear. Who doesn't like to swear? Ah, crap and poop and doo doo and hell and bitch and fuck and whatever coming. And it's all so fun. It's all so much fun to talk about all this bullshit and streams of shit and whatever, fucking anal stuff. And I will just say this is just an opinion. This has no intellectual weight and salience at all. But it's just like there's a lot of the time I'm like, oh, how fun. But then there's other parts where I'm like, okay, Mr. Potty Mouth. That's I get it. You don't have to you didn't have to put it that way. And I'm not trying to be Puritan or repressive. It's just it just seemed it just sometimes seems a little like it's like they're like, yeah, guess what, mom, dad, even though mommy, daddy, I can say fucking doo doo poo, whatever, and you can't do anything because it's in my book and it's surrounded by all this smart stuff. You know what I mean? It's like sometimes and this is totally baseless, but it's just sometimes it comes across a little pointless or not a little pointless, but just a little slightly unnecessary in just being like, yeah, guess what? This ain't your grandpa's philosophy book. Whoa, we're writing philosophy with cuss words. Like, can you fucking believe it? And it sometimes is just like, okay, but okay, moving on to actual before we get into the any more talk about anal stuff, because I know they talk about anal sublimation at a certain point, but right around page 143. But before that, I just want to make a few remarks. Hello, everybody. It's another day of us doing this thing we do, D&G. Savages, Barbarians, Civilized Men. I like this. This was one of my favorite parts to read of the text, and one of the favorite readings so far. This was, God, the part about the American dream. No one has ever died of contradiction. I legitimately was like, okay, this is really good. Like, this is really, really, really good critical theory. I was like, I was just like, I was blown away. I was genuinely, and it has happened once or twice before in the text, but I'm always kind of slightly skeptical because of like, the aura around Deleuze and Guattari and like my experience with other people who have written to criticize them. And I've been kind of like tentatively, investigating their work, but it's just this section was really like enthralling. It was really captivating. It was really cool. And I have a lot of questions as a result. I have like 5 or 6 or 7 different questions that start pretty early in the text, because we read from like page 139 to page 153, and my questions start around 141. And I'm just going to give it just to the room. I'm going to just throw out like a basic attempt at recounting my understanding up to the point where I have a question. And it's okay from the beginning, from 139. It's this new section. We're starting this new section called Savages, Barbarians, and Civilized Men. And so I think that they've done a bit here up to now in the text. Like the previous chapter was all about the Holy Family, psychoanalysis, the problem, why it's a problem, why it is so restrictive, why and how. In fact, not just why, but how. Why, how, in what ways, in what areas the psychoanalytic structure is repressive in some sense, and why and how, like where did it get this idea of being the Holy Family or whatever? Why are they so obsessed with this family, and what are their attempts to get away from it, and why are we not satisfied with those attempts? Really trying to just convince the reader, like, which I think is good. It was just, and it worked well to say like there is a problem, and we're not just postulating about abstract, be like bullshit right now. Like there's a social problem going on through the structure of our care of mental illness and our notion of mental health and psychology. There's a deep-seated issue at hand, and we're only beginning to feel the reverberations because the field is relatively new. I thought it was really compelling. Okay, so now they're like, okay, we've convinced you that there's a problem, hopefully. Hopefully we've compelled you to believe us when we say that there is a problem. Now now in this new section, it's like, okay, let's ground our perspective. Let's ground our perspective. Let's do a little bit more analysis of the context. Let's try and see how what we're saying relative to psychoanalysis and so on, how it fits in with with this broader picture of humanity and human history. How does what we're saying reflect on history? How could you even potentially look at history through a schizoanalytic lens, right? At certain styles of historical analysis through schizoanalysis, like, how could you do that? This is what, and I found this to be really cool. This is a really interesting premise. And they start by saying, or it seems to me, and this is all just, again, I'm just trying to recount my reading of what I thought they were saying, but it seems to me like they start with a pretty simple premise. And it says, okay, coding desire. Desire is coded. There's a code that things follow. Machines follow codes. Desire is a part of this machinic process. Desire is coded. The coding of desire is the business of this thing we've been referring to called the Socius. And if anything I'm saying, by the way, rubs anybody the wrong way or seems wrong or whatever, tell me. But it seems like they're saying coding desire is the business of the Socius. And capitalism, weirdly enough, this thing we're in now, operates based on decoded flows of desire and so on. So what happened? So then they're like, okay, so there seems to be this quarrel, capitalism decoding flows versus Socius coding desire. Well, what happens? Well, let's look at capitalism a little bit more. Capitalism liberates the flow of desire, but with a caveat, within certain limits. There are certain limits of capital within which the flows of desire are liberated. And then they make a point about universal history, which I totally agreed with. Universal history is retrospective, contingent, ironic, and critical. I thought that was a fantastic reading of universal history. I thought that was excellent, excellent theory. But then they go on to say, okay, so we're talking about how capitalism is all these decoded flows and whatever, but we made this statement about the Socius coding flows. Well, let's take a step back so we can make this make sense. Before we get to this this contradiction or this opposition, this antagonism, even though I don't think they would say that. Let's look at how that happened. So they're like, okay, let's begin at the beginning with this little story of once they justify a universal history, a retrospective, contingent, ironic, and critical universal history, they're like, okay, let's do a retrospective, contingent, ironic, and critical reading of universal history, shall we? All right, well, where do we start? The universe, the history of the universe, right? And they say this, and this is on page 140 and 141. This is where, 141 is where they really get into it. This is what the place I'm talking about. This is where my questions begin. So they say the earth, the capital E earth. This was the notion that I was most confused about and that I probably have the most questions about. And the thing I'm most curious about from this reading is their notion of the earth. This is what I'm most curious about. The earth is this thing that's superior to desire, or superior to production, and a precondition of production, and it is the object of desire. It is in a way, a primitive territorial machine. That was a key term of theirs, I think. The earth, to me, the earth equals primitive territorial machine. And then how do they describe that? How do they define a primitive territorial machine? Well, they call it a mega machine that covers the social field. And the social machine is this thing made of men and machines, which has a memory, which is on this mega machine of primitive territoriality. And then they go on to say, well, the earth as this primitive territorial machine, this mega machine that covers the social field, it, in a way, codes flows and invests organs. Those are two of its primary functions. It codes flows, it invests organs. And what it means like it invests organs with operations, with code, with things that they're going to do. Organs, not just meaning literal physical organs, but bodies of water, stretches of land, social strata, valleys where people can live, mountain sides that have trees with just enough vegetation for orangutans to survive on them. You know what I mean? This investment of organs with code and the coding of flows of those powers and the organs that are the result of those flows. The earth is just this primitive territorial machine that, outside of our control, the manipulation of any other person, it just does this. It codes flows and invests organs. A natural thing that is not a controversial statement at all. This is just an obvious kind of description of what a setting does. This is like a setting in a story, the setting for the story of humanity, in a way. It codes flows, it invests organs, and it plugs desire into the Socius and assembles social and desiring production. The earth as the setting, the territory. You know what I mean? And I think they're thinking here in terms of like prehistory and the development of landscapes, geographies, the determinate factors that establish social relations, certain areas having better access to running water or clean water or fresh water, or better climates in certain areas, which led them to drink more milk or have more access to fresh vegetation or be more livable or less desertified or whatever. Just the various qualitative differences between the different areas and organs of the earth are a result of the structure of the earth, this primitive territorial machine. This is not confusing to me. This is not what's confusing me. But here's what's confusing to me. Here's my basic question. I have two questions. First off, there's this other term that people would use to describe earth or to say the earth, and it would be capital N, nature. And I'm thinking like 19th century romanticism, for example. Nature, this natural thing. Not to say that it follows all the rules of 19th century romanticism where it's this perfect self-reproductive, beautiful, harmonious thing, but I mean just nature as this abstract thing that's not me, this other to me, this thing that is my other. It's not us, it's the earth, it's nature. So my question is, would you guys say that their notion of earth is synonymous or homologous to this general common sense notion of nature as this thing that's not artificial? It's not us. It's not us. It's nature. It's this thing that's not us. It's our other. That's how Lacan puts it. Nature is our other, in a sense. That's my first question. Is earth equal to nature, which is our other? And the second thing is, when they say that earth codes, flows, and invests organs, a different way that I could translate this, and Nevitt, you might get this, you might relate to this. This is how I translated it, is basically, if I could just restate the terms earth codes, flows, and invests organs, if I could just restate that in more commonplace language, I would say facticity determines desires. Like, you know what I mean? Like you desire things that are imaginable or in front of you or whatever. You know what I mean? Is that all they're saying? When they say earth codes, flows, and invests organs, and it plugs desires into the Socius and assembles social and desiring production, does that just mean like your factual setting will determine your desires? Is that all they're trying to say? And is that factual setting earth? Well, it is, but is that factual setting that determines our desires nature or this other to humanity? You know what I'm saying? Those are my two basic questions to just kind of kick off, because I'm really interested in this notion of the earth. But that's what I'm getting from that. That's what I think they're saying. But I'm trying to like run that by you guys and see if there's, I don't know, any agreement or disagreement or whatever.
Yeah, so the earth, so this is so I usually say Socius, but I think if you actually go by the classical Latin pronunciation, Socius is actually would be correct. So whatever, we know what we're talking about. So so this is the Socius for the primitive territorial machine. So this is what's going to act. It's the body of thought organs, which we've, been learning about in relative degrees, but more from almost the kind of abstract schematic of it, I think. And now here we're getting a kind of, okay, let's think about it. Okay, so in the Republic, it's about the individual being just. How do we look at the individual, figure these things out? Well, we just have to kind of blow up the individual and actually see how it's by looking at the city. And there's supposed to be some kind of a parallelism between the city and the individual, the soul. And from there, we can figure out what justice is, which, interestingly enough, is a kind of proportion of body parts, in a way, or faculties of the soul. Desire is one of them. But I think there's something like that. Is kind of the main idea with the Socius kind of thing. This is the body without organs, but this is in its social collective function. And here it takes place in a more specific way with the earth. And so I think the way that I can best understand this is kind of by thinking in terms of mythologies and any kind of a tribal societies, mythologies, religions, rituals, rites. Usually they're any kind of a conception of some kind of religious divine thing, that all these things are everything. We're doing something. What are we doing it for? In a way, it's we would probably call it I don't know, God is dead, but maybe in a few decades ago or something, people would at least call it God, and that's kind of like a sort of a quasi cause that people will attribute things to. But that doesn't really, that's not working for a tribal society. So instead, it's the earth, and I think that's because it is kind of so if you just kind of look into any kind of an indigenous society, I think there is the danger of all these stereotypes of it's kind of like the noble savage kind of thing, Rousseau, of thinking that oh yes, the native is in tune, in harmony with nature and all this stuff. But I don't think that's exactly what's going on here, obviously. But at the same time, I think there's this idea of, well, they're more connected with the territory in an actual physical sense of the land, the earth, the resources, all these things. And but then what the earth is, as in its function as a Socius, is a kind of, so it's this kind of a unity in a way that it's, at least that's posited about it, that there's this notion of a kind of unitary function, and that's what acts as the quasi cause that appropriates production. And that is a kind of organizing, let's say, structure, but that's not what they would want to say. But I think that's something kind of like what how the earth operates there. So Hunter, your question about nature, I think, okay, so I think it's definitely different from a kind of 19th century European romantic notion of nature, and I think that's still today we have an idea of nature. If I say it's nature with a capital N or whatever, we think of trees and grass and deer, and I think that is not what the earth is. And I don't think it's like I actually know, I was going to use this as to contrast the notion, but okay, like neo hippies, whatever. If you go to Burning Man and you have to hear the like 20-year-old like neo hippie girl talk about the earth and energy and vibrations, but I think it's something, there is a correlate to the way that earth works there as a kind of so what is as the natural or divine precondition that falls back on the force of production and appropriates them. So in the sense that, okay, maybe this neo hippie girl, she ends up doing a bunch of mescaline and having a bunch of sex, an orgy, group orgy at Burning Man. And she does it in her mind because of the earth, for the harmonies of the energy of the earth. I think in that sense, the earth is working something like a quasi-cause that is still kind of in between production, but yet it's not the productive connections themselves. Instead, it's something that production is on, but in a way that is kind of adjacent to the actual production. So that is kind of what the earth is doing here. And I think, so one connection I think might help is, so the other machine that we've got going is for the barbaric imperial machine that's going to, so the primitive territorial machine, it codes flows. The earth is a Socius. So the barbarian imperial despotic machine, the Socius for that is the body of the despot. So I think if you look at, okay, if you've ever seen the cover of Hobbes' Leviathan, I think that's a pretty good example of the body of the despot, this kind of mythical body that, oh, this is what does everything in our society. This is what we do it all for. This is how it's all connected. This is what really, the immobile motor of production. Yeah, so something like that is also how the earth is functioning. But nature, I think, is going to be something a little different, especially, so the capital N for nature, at least in terms of, for Deleuze and Guattari, and probably Deleuze in particular, with Spinoza, he's always, so when they actually talk about nature in the first section, it's obviously a Spinozist idea of nature that is going on there, but that's aligned with kind of the whole process of production, because it's also a Spinozist kind of thing. So Spinoza, for Spinoza, the nature, God, and substance are all basically synonymous. So as far as how that would work here, I think that that's going to be a little different in the sense that there's still kind of some complex stuff going on with production and how it works with the Socius. And that's true in all the different Sociuses, Socii. So in the sense that they make the point that processes of production are not actually what is happening. Instead, it's more the connections and the disjunctions. That seems to be the thing that's operating with so yeah, I guess, I mean, it's, at least to me, it's not super clear exactly how the Socius operates for all these operations in between them, between, these three syntheses and whatnot. But there's definitely a distinction between the Socius and these processes of production, in the same way that and that's why the Socius is instead, it's not the cause, it's the quasi-cause, and it's not production, it's appropriating and falling back on production. So if we take the Spinoza's idea of, nature and production, then nature is not going to be the same as Earth. But then even like but you're specifically asking about like this kind of like common sense, the regular way that we would interpret nature. So in that sense, I think that it's almost kind of the things that we would think of as nature, the tree, the deer, that kind of stuff would probably be included on the Earth as another thing that connects with it. Although in terms of kind of a otherness, that's a little difficult too. Because, okay, so I think that if you listen to, indigenous tribes talk about the Earth or something like that, the way they would talk about it as something that they're intimately connected to, but that they're not identical with it. They wouldn't say necessarily, I think that, I am the Earth in the way that, I think even the way that, say, like a mystic would say something like, I am God, I think there'd still be something, there's more of a distinction there. Although I wouldn't want to align it necessarily with some kind of like a German idealism concept of a kind of other with a capital O, this idea of a kind of, alterity relations. I think that is, but I think that does arrive with this notion of the decoding of the flows and schizophrenia and whatnot, that's definitely the other. So there's it's almost in between these different sociuses really is where you see kind of real relations of alterity that they come from the outside. And especially the way that, okay, so the universal history idea is kind of, you look at it retrospectively backwards from the end of history, which would be capitalism decoding all these flows as this kind of ideal point, the singularity at the end. And that's in terms of an alterity relation, that's going to be this alterity relation that they talk about as coming from the outside. In the same way that these societies, every social formation is haunted by its negative. So because it's defined by codes in the primitive territorial machine or overcoding in the imperial machine. So then decoding is going to be the absence of all those things, although it still has axioms, but we'll get to that. But that's going to be a kind of alterity relation. And also they talk about it as, so even when the imperial machine comes and overcodes the primitive territorial machine, that's also a kind of alterity relation that comes from outside. And that's also, so it's in the genealogy of morality, the way that Nietzsche talks about the foundation of the state and these the cruel artists that shape humans into kind of the modern person. That is going to be also a kind of alterity relation, and that it's coming from the outside always. So yeah, that's, hopefully that answered something. But yeah, Hunter, a lot of what you said was really, really interesting. I'm also glad you appreciated a lot of what's going on. That warms my heart, truly. Okay, so one thing I will say is I would like to hear someone's opinion on basically page 143, the stuff about the anus and the privatization of organs and sublimation, Aufhebung. I think that part is really interesting. So the idea, you've got these collective investments of organs, and that's what codes these flows and determines, what can connect with what, where does this go? What does that do? But then you get this privatization of the anus, and that corresponds also with the constitution of a kind of private individual that's built on that privatization of the organ. I think that's really interesting, but I want to hear what this whole idea of like psychoanalytic sublimation occurring through the anus being lifted on high. I think it's very interesting.
Can I ask, before we go on to more complicated stuff like that, I just have some really basic, simple questions, about the vocabulary. I'm hoping, hopefully, we can clear these up just really quickly and then get on to that page. So I just struggling to understand what these terms mean, like, what does it mean to code the flows of desire, and how does capitalism destroy that? But so here's what I wrote in the chat, and tell me if this is. So my question was, does code the flows of desire basically mean to define the functions of organs? And then after that, I said, and then why does it mean that? And so I said, maybe because defining what counts as an organ, or maybe how partial objects constitute organs. So defining what is an organ and defining how organs interact to form machines. And I'm guessing that's what it means to code desire. And it means to code desire because that determines the possibilities for what can be desired and how desires access things, how desires move through the system. Am I in the right track there? That's largely okay?
Yeah, I think so. It's okay. So coding the flows, that's going to be, if you think of, a way just kind of almost basically literal flows of something, the way that we would even talk about it, like in economics or something like that. But even something like the flow of some kind of food product, whether it's hunted animals or seeds or something like that, that's going to be some kind of flow. But the question is, where does it go? What are we going to do with it? So I think the coding of it, it determines what's going to happen with the three syntheses, in the sense that the first one is going to be, connective. The second one is going to be disjunctive. And that's really all you need to worry about, I think, at this point. So I think to code a flow is going to be, where does this flow of grain or whatever it is, what does it connect to? What is not allowed to connect to it? And then disjunction is going to be something also kind of like that, along which line does it go? So it's a selective process of kind of just seeing, where can this flow go? And the way that it would be kind of coupled with a collective investment of the organs, we sound like, okay, so with the flow of grain, it would be, in order to get in on the act, you've got to have some kind of a group kind of identity with the collective mouth and stomach of the tribe, something like that. It's kind of a ridiculous example, but whatever. So that I think that's kind of the basic idea, though, is it determines those connections, disjunctions, whatnot, for these certain flows. But even, so another one would be, flow of, so they talk, flow of semen, sperm flows. Yeah, right here. Okay, so a lot of what's gonna, and the next section hits on this really hard, is all this stuff about, marriage or alliance, which can be alliance structures, and then you got descent lineages, basically who can marry who can have sex with who can have children with who, all this stuff. So deciding, who can have sex with who, that's going to be a kind of coding of these sperm flows. Where can sperm flow? Where is it allowed to connect with some other partial organ? That's going to be a major concern for the Socius, and that's where you're going to see that having some kind of a collective investment of an organ that can connect with other organs. So a lot of initiations are going to be centered on this idea of what are you being initiated into? Kind of being a man is usually how it's phrased. And what does that mean? That means basically you can marry usually, and also that you can go to war usually. But the initiation will usually have something specific that is coded there in the sense of what organ that corresponds to. And indeed, it burns it into your memory through pain and cruelty and whatnot. So I looked at some YouTube videos of kind of just rituals and whatnot, and indeed there's some pretty good examples. Some of it, I mean, YouTube is kind of ridiculous, the way it's kind of presented. It's obviously more sensationalized, at least the videos I saw, but I can post some stuff probably on Discord that's an example. But I think thinking of those rituals and the way that those connect, I think that's at least the way that I see it. Yeah.
So, when Hunter was talking about the earth and the organs of the earth, bodies of water and force and stuff, that was really helpful for me, because so if I understand what you and Hunter together are saying, so then the earth has these organs, and at least for primitive humanity, those organs define the possibilities of desire and organization. So for example, if you need fresh water, then this organ of a stream or a freshwater lake is going to define where that desire can access something. And then as you get more highly developed social organizations, then those social organizations can begin to redefining the meaning of those organs and thereby redefining the possibilities for desire and the way desire moves through both the social and natural environment. Is that a correct reading? Okay, I'm good now. Let's go on and talk about the anus.
Okay, I want to talk about the anus. Dibs on anus. Sorry, no, I just want to open I just want to open the discussion. You know what I'm saying? I want to, hey, all right. We're talking about all these, well, because I want to try, both to myself and to everybody, to make, like, okay, let's own up to one thing. First off, it's a little funny. It's a little funny to be taught, and that's what they're getting at when they're talking about a giant rat's ass in the sky. It's a little funny, and we can have a little fun. It's funny to talk about big asses and whatever, but what is functionally being described when we talk about the anus as organ? The anus as an organ. Well, what do organs do? Organs are basically, I don't want to say structures, but I'm just so caught up with the word structure, like a constellation of, or like an apparatus of desire or flow. So yeah. What does an anus do as an organ? That's the thing. You guys are in the chat are already with me. Like, is it expulsion of waste? No, I think it's, well, I mean, yeah, that does one thing. It does kind of, but Eric is right on the money, in my opinion. Retention. It's this gateway that closes and holds and okay, just to be as vulgar and stupid as possible to make the analogy make sense to me, like my anus closes so that I do not shit everywhere. And not because I want to not shit everywhere necessarily, but because I was told to not do that. I was trained cruelly, almost perhaps, by my parents at a young age to retain. That anus down there, that's for retaining. That's not for just letting loose. That's for retaining. You need to train that anus to retain. But then through this training, oddly enough, that comes to be basically kind of the primary function of the muscular structure of the anus. And I'm talking like kind of biophysical, like medically, clinically, physiologically. Yeah. Retention of shit, I think. Yes, like retention of shit in a way. So this we've got two. So then they talk about these two organs. First they're talking about earth coding flows and investing organs and desiring production and whatever. But then they're like, okay, now that we've talked about how the earth codes flows and it plugs desire into the Socius, like Nevitt, what you were talking about, to go from what you were talking about to the anus and the penis. Let's do that. I think the way they do it, the segue they use is to say, okay, in this realm of earth organs, like streams and stuff that are coding desire, there's like a collective access to those organs. There's a collective communal participation. There's communities have access to water. Groups or clans or villages or tribes or whatever social setting, whatever social cell, Zizek calls them that, social cells. Social cell has access to some organ of the earth. It's a communal access in a sense. But he said, but then they move in and say, okay, they move on and say, okay, well, now that we know that there's this sort of communal relationship to the earth, nowadays, and not just as you mean like, oh, woe the times, woe the customs, as a sort of, I don't want to say natural, but this sort of playing out of this access to organs, it has now come to pass that we largely privatize those organs in a lot of ways. We privatize the access to water. We privatize the access to land. We privatize like all land on earth is owned by somebody. Every organ is owned by somebody. Every organ is private. Even Kant, was like Kant was talking about why is it there's a funny argument by Kant that we talked about not too long ago where it was like, and I was talking to somebody recently about why I think capital has liberating dimensions and why I think German idealism is liberating in a sense. And it was that Kant talks about like a relationship between a man and a woman, like through like a matrimonial relationship as a sort of exchange of property of sexual organs in a sense, which, and I know, yes, I'm skipping over some big details, but one thing, a funny line he says, and I think he's intentionally a little bit trying to be funny, is a woman, but he's also making a sincere point, Kant, and this is a point in service of the privatization of organs, and I'm getting there. I'm going to get deeper into the point, deeper, right? Like a penis. Kant says, a wife, if her husband runs away and they're still married, she has the right, she should have the right, at least morally speaking, she should have the right to call the authorities and say, he has run away with a piece of my property. And they would say, what property? And she would say, his penis. I signed a contract and I made a deal. I gave away a part of my sexual organ or my sexual organs. I signed them away, right? As a sort of mutual trust coalition between myself and this man. And he signed away, in a sense, like legal, yes. And I think like his legal deductions are some of the funniest Kant ever. Like there's some of his best work, but she's like, she can say, he ran away with my property. I need it back. And he is against the law for that. He's stealing that thing down there is mine. And there are a lot of other weird, like, when is it okay to kill somebody? And he says a woman can, in a sense, kill an illegitimate child because it's like a smuggled good into a state. A lot of interesting conclusions that are made. My point is, this privatization of organs, even the organs of others, even in something like matrimonial or nuptial relations. Not even like you are literally a sex slave and your physical organs, or just a slave, and your physical organs literally belong to me, in a sort of economic sense that seems to make more sense to us now in our economic financial minds. But like in that sense for Kant of like a nuptial relation, where it's like, well, in a sense, I do have a sort of private codified ownership of this organ. So we're talking in this sense. We are steeped in that. It has been hundreds of years since Kant. We have been kind of embedded in this. So they're saying, well, we now in modernity and pretty much, you know, moving through or past or out of this primitive society, we privatize organs. And they say, okay, well, what organs are usually at the top of our mind? Because you privatize all kinds of organs. But what kind of organs do we want to talk about here that are like the hot topics of privatization, rather than communal organization? And they say penises and anuses. And these penises and anuses, in a sense, the penis is privatized and the anus is privatized in the sense that they are detached and disinvested. They use those key terms, detached and disinvested, which means not from a, I guess, relative or embedded in a social field flow, a flow in a social field of shit or whatever. No, now there are private persons with their private flow and their private shit. That is my shit. That's my anus. I'm not gonna, no longer will I go to a Roman bathroom and poop in a weird public bathroom where I'm looking directly at another person. This is my business. It's so mine, you don't even get to look at it because it's mine. And I feel kind of disrespected and assaulted when you look at it, because it's mine. And the point of this is not to say, chill out, it's just your penis, let people look at it. It's not to say that, but it's to point at an attitude, not just an attitude, but an attitude reflective of a condition of the flow of desire. It's not just like people are too stuffy these days. It's people are thinking about this differently now. And why are they doing that? And they would say that the reason why, to me, is that there's this becoming abstract that I think they find a problem with. They say, in fact, there's a sentence, our modern societies have instead undertaken a vast privatization of the organs, which corresponds to the decoding of flows that have become abstract. This abstraction, this move towards decoding, this disinvestment, this detachment from this group communal flow. There's this subtraction, this substitution, this taking away, this pulling away. And this, it constitutes the private person as an individual center of organs. In fact, I'm pulling directly from the text. A private person as an individual center of organs and functions. And this is tied in with what all of the last 400 years, the amount of people who have been bemoaning or praising the march of social Western, I would say, attitudes towards something like, and I'm going to this is not what they're saying, but this is like in line with what they're saying, the move of the West towards the sovereign individual. You know what I'm saying? The progression and emboldening of the image of the sovereign individual. It's not the cause of any of this, but it's a part of this big, wider process of forces in competition that are culminating into this event or disinvestment, this disinvestment of organs and flows in, I guess, I don't know what it's in the interest of. I don't know what it's in the interest of. I don't know why we're doing it necessarily, but we are doing it. It's which I guess that would be a question for me, is why are we doing this? Why are we disinvesting? Why are we privatizing? But I guess that's kind of the question of the era, is like, what the fuck? Why are we doing this? But and some people would say that has good reason. Why are we doing this? Because I don't want you looking at my butthole. and I don't want you touching my stuff, and I want to lord over you, and I want you to be my slave, and I'm stronger than you, and I'm bigger than you, and I'm tougher than you, so fuck you. Like there's some people who would say that, and I personally find that reasoning to not be very compelling, so I'm looking for more reasons. But my point is about anuses and penises. So they say, okay, this the penis and the anus are two common objects of this privatization, of this disinvestment, of this detachment. But they take the term detachment into a super extended like area. They say like, okay, well, detached in what sense? Well, it's like a double, almost triple speak kind of thing they're doing when they say the detachment of the penis, the detachment from the social field, the detachment from my sense of intimate meaning, and the detachment in the sense of my fear of its detachment through castration. Like they're making sort of a side, like a through one side of their mouth, they're making a reference to castration, while at the same time saying like, look, the very fear of castration is castrating us. Like Oedipus oedipalizes. Like this is a further restatement of their previous arguments. The very fear of this decoding is it's fulfilling the prophecy. It's driving you crazy. It's like they're constantly trying to shake the reader by the lapels and say, you are driving yourself insane. You have to realize that this is not healthy. This is not a good thing to do. You can't be afraid that your dad's going to cut your dick off. This is insane. You know, like this is not good for you. It can't be. I don't know what's good, but come on, man. Like they're desperately trying to appeal in all these different ways. And they're saying, okay. So then they get a little bit more specific and they talk about the anus. The anus is a very specific module. Like you guys have said, this retention, self-control, this self-flagellation, self-regulation, self-sacrifice. And in a sense, here's the next term, which I think makes it all kind of gel. Self-sublimation, in a sense. Because what is it really to sublimate? But to take the stupid, partial, worthless, whatever, and to bring it up into this greater exalted thing, this more meaningful thing. I am not just a person among other persons. I'm not just a stupid, dumb asshole that's, you know, a result of all these contingent characteristics and settings and coded desires or whatever. I'm a sovereign individual. And that's not just my, you know, bottom body part. That's a part of my anal drive. And it relates to my anal fixations. And it's this key to understanding my relationship to my mother or something. It's like, okay, whoa. Like by disinvesting it from any of its actual potency or saliency or meaning, you are then like abstracting it and kind of injecting into your anus these weird kind of like inappropriate meanings that are leading to this sort of self-destruction through self-sublimation, like this self-sacrificing almost in this sort of vein. Like it's like they're pointing at, in a way, and I mean, I don't mean to, you know, accuse them of anything, but like a Hegelian coincidence of opposites, like you think, it's like they're saying, look, you think that you are empowering and emboldening the subjective position relative to the penis and the anus and enlivening and coloring our understandings of our penises and our anuses. But what you're serving to do, despite your best intentions, perhaps, Mr. Psychoanalyst, is you're making people afraid and detached and disconnected from penises and anuses. So when I say penises and anuses, I don't mean literally like your body part, your penis and anus. I mean, kind of, really, you do. I mean, I do kind of mean like your penis and your anus, but like in this functional, organizational sense. So here's my big point. They say we now privatize organs, penises and anuses, and that sublimation, that self-control, that self-flagellation, that, oh, my mommy, daddy, they told me not to go poopy. And so my anus's function is to retain, is to be controlled, is to be a good little boy, is to not make a mess, you know? It serves that function well. And so therefore it's good. It's a good anus, you know? This is where they're coming from when they're saying like the anus and anality is, in a sense, I don't know if I would say a parallelism, or no, I wouldn't say, I would say it's homologous with our conception of sublimation, of taking my dirty, stupid butt and going from just being a worthless little monkey that just shits all over the place and makes a damn mess to being a civilized person who can get along in society and who can reach spirit. And I can read philosophy books without having to make a mess everywhere. And I can pontificate and go to business meetings and conquer the world and be a member of the republic. I can engage in questions like, what is justice? Because I'm not shitting all over the place. I've engaged in some self-control. I've self-flagellated. I've become potty trained. And through that, I have elevated myself. Thank God I've whipped myself to the point of self-control. So they say, okay, all sublimation then in a sense is this anality, is this self-control, this resistance, this self-organization, this codification, this in a way kind of Oedipalization. That Oedipus is anal, right? So here's the thing though. Here's what I think is confusing. Here's where I think is confusing, and I want to just throw this out and then stop talking. So they say libido is the essence of desire. And I say, okay, I'll buy it, I'll bite. And they say, but then when libido becomes an abstract quantity, means it's disinvested, the anus produces global persons which serve as units of measure, right? And so I'm basically getting what they're saying. What I'm basically getting from what they're saying is the anal organizational function, of self-control, of potty training, of self-regulation of desire, the regulation of desire through my anus, basically. It's hard not to sound vulgar when you're talking about this stuff, but it is the process that produced all those figures and figments that we were talking about last chapter in the Holy Family. All those global persons like mommy and daddy and Oedipus, these big, grand, global, universal figures, Jungian mythological archetypes, Freudian mythological vehicles of understanding, symbols, images, global egos, global images. Those only come about as a result of this idea that, oh, I've trained myself, I've trained my mind from the primitive, stupid barbarian that I once was, or that my ancestors were, into this more refined person. I'm more refined. I have a computer. I'm a 21st century person. I read books and I don't shit everywhere. And I have self-control. And I can spend time theorizing. And like Aristotle. Aristotle is the ultimate figure of the anus, basically. Aristotle is a big anus in the sense that he valorizes the contemplative life. The whole goal of living is to stop doing that, is to stop shitting everywhere and start thinking. Stop shitting so you can start thinking. That's Aristotle's basic injunction. And I think they are basically saying like, well, what if I need to shit? You know, they're trying to re-problematize that. They're not saying like, oh, just kill and rape and murder people all you want, but they're trying to re-problematize where we draw the lines. And I like that. I'm very interested, right? Yeah, sure. But so here's my question. But they said, when libido becomes an abstract quantity, the anus produces these global psychoanalytic persons. But here's my question. What do they mean when libido becomes an abstract quantity? That's my question of this section. What do they mean libido becoming an abstract quantity? I don't know what that is in reference to or what it means or looks like.
Money.
Well, okay, go ahead. I'm interested. What do you guys think about all that? Yeah, tell me more.
Oh, yes, the abstract quantity thing. This is what how they're gonna describe also decoding in a certain way too. Okay, so the codes are usually composed of heterogeneous elements. So it'd be something like what your anus and whatever prestige, and also something so they would use the currency that would be used would be something kind of totally just on hand and picked for the most part somewhat randomly. It was always, there was one kind of unit of one medium or of exchange or currency or whatnot that was common to all these people. So some people could not trade with other people, and that's kind of was part of the point, I think, at least is what Deleuze and Guattari are kind of saying, in the sense that these social formations kind of sense their own possible disintegration, that they can no longer code the flows, that, you know, they're sitting on a volcano that's starting to rumble. And that, of course, is the emergence of capital from the outside, from the future. And if I sound like Nick Land, it's because that's what Nick Land says. He likes that. But anyways, yeah, okay, so abstract quantities, that's going to be, okay, suddenly what's going on here, it's no longer about this kind of locally determined collection of heterogeneous elements that's all over the place, but it makes sense, it works in that location. And of course there'll be, you know, so a lot of the second section was about, you know, how all these, there's for the most part, it's, you know, filiation, descent, you know, who actually is your mother and father, and where did you descend from? You know, the vertical hierarchical structure, or I think it's not a structure, I think yeah. So a lot of this was about, was kind of poo-pooing, yeah, on the notion of structure, and instead kind of replacing with other stuff. But so you've got that, and you've also got alliance, which is going to be, okay, who actually determines who marries who? It's based off the, you know, these mobile blocks of debt. And this is, okay, this is, I think, where Bataille is very helpful. And also about the potlatch and whatnot, that, oh, somebody gives you a gift. Now you're in a something of a kind of a negative position, I guess. And from there, you're then expected, there's a reciprocal implication with being given that gift, that you then have to top that person who gave the gift. Otherwise you face, you know, losing prestige and whatnot. So for also the kind of unit of value and something like that, is going to be collectively determined, but in a more specific way. And I think that's another way also that they're contrasting these other social formations with what capitalism eventually does. So eventually you get from these different social formations. First, you've got, you know, how things are circulated through these blocks of debt. You know, you'll have circulations of these flows. You'll have, you know, some women will be married over here with this, I owe you a debt, here's, you know, my daughter or whatever. So you've got something like that going on. Quite different from, you know, going to 7-Eleven and like buying something with a few dollars. Although that's kind of a bad example, but so then in imperial kind of machine, then it's kind of, okay, the value changes where you still don't have one kind of over-determining currency for everything, because you've got, you know, markets and things like that, but they're not kind of all consuming, and they don't, you know, structure all of the rest of society. You'll have usually still something kind of like a prestige kind of value, honor kind of system that's based off of how the despot kind of values things. That's usually where there's still some kind of like a currency there that's going to be different from a market currency, which is quantitative. So one big difference, I think, is that in these other social formations, these measurements that they'll do, well, they're not quantitative, they're qualitative a lot of times. There's no kind of way to calculate prestige exactly. So that usually means that it ends up being more of a kind of, there's an inexactitude kind of built into it, and also it'll necessarily involve a kind of collective operation to come up with the idea of this quality that gives it that value. So with money, okay, this is kind of the classical extensive magnitudes. Okay, they're homogeneous in that one is the same as any other one. $1 is the same as any other dollar. You know, you can add them up, you can subtract them and everything, but at the end, the idea is, you know, one is a unit and it's all the same. And that's the idea basically. That's what they mean by an abstract quantity. It's basically just that, a dollar, whatever your unit of measure is. And that's the same thing that they're saying that is similar to this idea of, you know, the private individual that comes about with the disinvestment of the anus from the social field. Suddenly, oh, okay, so one thing I think is really interesting about, okay, sublation. So there's a few different kind of meanings of sublation. There's one way of thinking about it as the sub part, if you kind of emphasize that, is a kind of going under, or a kind of it's emphasizing kind of the removal aspect of it. So there's this dual movement of a removal from the social field, but then also there's at the same time a raising on high. So there's this aspect of raising something, truly sublating it, taking it on, carrying it on. And that's this, okay, that's actually what is sublated in the sense of going up to these higher functions and whatnot. And that's, so that's, okay, sublation so for Freud would be something like, instead it's a substitute that you're kind of, that replaces what is being sublated. So if the anus is sublated in Freud, it's for, you know, a kind of a replacement substitution, which would be, you know, money. I think it's pretty sure that's what Freud says in something. But here instead they're saying that the anus is itself is kind of is sublated. It's also raised on high at the same time that it's disinvested in the social field. And I think that's, okay, the best way I think to understand that, well, I think, Hunter, I think you just described that pretty well and very nicely. It's great. But okay, I think just potty training in a way is one of the best ways to understand the idea of this connection with the individual and the disinvestment of the anus and the flows of shit and whatnot. And this idea of, okay, anal retention of these things, self-control, personal responsibility. So, you know, parents, whatnot, they'll be familiar with this phenomena of, yeah, you gotta teach your kid, like, that's one of your main kind of duties, is to try to teach your kid to be potty trained. And that's kind of this, one of the conditions of then going to some other kind of social function and being, Hunter, you already kind of described this, but I think it's a good example that makes it even more concrete, is this potty training and whatnot, that you can move from this state of kind of being attached to your parents to being an individual who is self-controlled and control themselves. And that's all. But I think what's kind of brilliant about that is kind of how much they put in that. And I think it just makes sense that, you know, the way that we think of ourselves as private individuals is almost like, is an extension of that kind of thing. So what is, you know, what keeps ascending is that kind of privative function that just keeps going and being escalated into, and then suddenly it becomes, this kind of romantic, almost, mystical quality of the sovereign individual becomes this, almost absolute thing that's, then you eventually get, like Sartre and like Kierkegaard and like the individuals, like, and I think, but yeah, that part is lovely. So there's some question here. How is this related to libido? Well, it's all libido. Yeah. Everything is desire, flows of desire. So, well, I think really, even they are still kind of coming from a Freudian perspective, especially I think with the anal sublation thing. And, so that's involved with, child development. So Freud's going to see that, his kind of big controversial claim is that, there's an infant sexuality. So there's already these libidinal investments going on kind of immediately with, and this is the classical Freudian stages, oral, anal, genital, whatever. And so I think they're still operating on something like that. And that's one thing they make pretty clear, is that they like that the libidinal quality of these things. The problem with Freud isn't that it's about sexuality and libido. And in fact, that's one thing they disagree with Jung about, is that he kind of desexualized it. Go ahead, Joseph. Go ahead.
No, I did want to ask you about that, because on 142, it seems that he's saying that there's like this again, this mythology of the Freudian aspect of what sexuality is and what the penis is and how it relates to mommy daddy, because he says the mythologies on 142, the mythologies sing of organs, partial objects, and their relations with a full body that repels or attracts them. Vagina is riveted on the woman's body, an immense penis shared by the men, and an independent anus that assigns itself a body without an anus. So it kind of goes, I guess, in tandem with what you guys are saying about the civilized behavior, and anality is viewed within this construct of sexuality, of retention and repression. And then on 151, he's linking sexuality, it seems, to the social dynamic, and then that social dynamic of sexuality to desiring machines, the social dynamic. And in that, he seems to be saying the deterritorialization, the destabilization, is what's going to essentially bring about its stabilization. So it's kind of like the whole sublation aspect of something containing in itself part of the other that leads to its growth. So that's what I took of the sublation, particularly in regards to sexuality. Because on 181, he says, or they say, 181, I'm sorry, 151, a little dark in here. By the gap between the real institution and the assumed ideal model morally, by invoking a structural bond between law and transgression, physically as though it were a question of attrition, that one would cause the social machine to lose its capacity to wield its materials. But here too, it seems that the correct interpretation would be above all actual and functional. It is in order to function that the social machine must not function well. And then later on, he says, here it becomes apparent that the social machine is identical with the desiring machine. The social machine's limit is not attrition, but rather in its misfirings. It can operate only by its fits and starts, by grinding and breaking down in spasms of minor explosions. The dysfunctions are an essential element of its variability to function, which is not the least important aspect of the system of cruelty. The death of a social machine has never been heralded by disharmony or dysfunction. On the contrary, social machines make a habit of feeding on the contradictions that they give rise to, on the crises they provoke, on the anxieties they engender, and on the infernal operations and on the infernal operations, they regenerate. So it seems like he's saying that there is a sublation aspect by taking and deviating sexuality and our social dynamics and the deterritorialization of the tribes, this sexual expression that has its own inscribing that leads to sublation, that you have multiple fluidities of groups, multiple fluidities of sexuality that are part and lead to this productive force that in its destabilization becomes stabilized. Is that a correct assumption in reading that?
Yeah, so I think the part about that specifically, okay, it's being decoded or deterritorialized, these different social codes, you know, you got these flows of desires, basic what's going on here, you know, setting up this connection with this connection, this thing can be with this thing can't be with that, you know, something like that. That's what's going to be eventually, okay, so it's going to be overcoded by the imperial kind of machine, you know, which just means basically instead of thinking of it as like the earth, you know, is the reason why we're coding this with this, instead it's going to be, you know, King Louis the VIII is the reason why this can connect this or this can't connect that. And then you get decoding with these abstract quantities when it's no longer kind of a question of human agency to a certain extent at that point. Instead, it becomes a kind of just a calculation where you have just, okay, what can connect with another thing is based off of, you know, profit incentives, market values. It's put into an axiom that can determine, you know, this lumber yard is the one that we need to cut in order to, you know, take it to this location because it has, you know, we could not pay a living wage to anyone. And, you know, this kind of calculation, that's going to be this decoding that they're going to talk about, setting up these axioms, these calculations, and that's going to be done with this idea of the abstract quantity money. Where before, yeah, it was this heterogeneous kind of mix of all these things. And yeah, so
is he saying that the money aspect is a way to say from an abstract quality, that's the thing to be desired, that's the thing you want, that's the thing that's been codified and has monetary value on it, go get it. And then we're stuck trying to get this thing with our codified objects that is kind of ideologically rooted that we want but will never obtain. So we don't really produce anything. We're not really doing anything other than trying to obtain this codified object of desire rather than expressing desire. And he seems to be linking that with sexuality and the fact that we're doing the same thing when we Oedipize the anus, when we look at sexuality as something like, oh, anal stimulation is associated with maybe some homosexual leanings that is due to a bad relationship with the father. And it's like, no, maybe there is no homosexual leanings. Maybe there's bisexual leanings. Maybe there's asexual leanings. Maybe the anus just likes to be stimulated, or maybe they, you know, why are we codifying this expression with an object like money when it should be allowed to destabilize itself in its own way, which, you know, that expression, that production of sexuality, like money, we shouldn't have an ideological object with sexual expression, just like money shouldn't have an object of desire. We need to produce. Is that what he's saying?
yeah, I think there's definitely something, and that's kind of taking on the whole kind of movement of this kind of universal history, in a sense that, yeah, so it starts off, you know, the production of desire is inherently not really coded, but it's really it's social production that codes all these things. So there you're always going to have some kind of repression because, so I think one of the good kind of rules of thumb for this book is social production equals social repression. So yes, so even this primitive territorial circuit, they'll still give a kind of, they'll take something that is heterogeneous, these kind of libidinal expressions of all kinds, and it'll be, so Levi-Strauss, they get this from Levi-Strauss, the idea of bricolage. Am I pronouncing that right at all? I have no idea. But this idea of kind of taking this mix of things from around your environment, you know, your lived experience, whatnot. And I think that part is definitely kind of, there's a kind of, you know, more or less experimental kind of aspect to that, creative to a certain degree aspect. But then that the coding of it, that's where you get that repressive kind of stability. Although I don't think of it as completely negative in a sense, because well, I mean, generally, this is I mean, it's a kind of Nietzschean thing where, you know, it's best to kind of like suspend, you know, beyond good and evil. But you've got, yeah, these codings, and then you've got the overcodings, but then you will have, yes, the liberation of these flows that happen with the decoding, in the sense that they're suddenly being kind of ripped out of their life world, and instead taken to a whole new element. However, the thing is that, because we're probably all too familiar with by now, capitalism, its liberation usually comes with another movement that just simply puts them back into axioms that don't really care about you. And then, yeah, so there's going to be less stability at this point. And this is going to be almost kind of like something almost close to like a runaway movement at this point, where can the axioms completely contain all these things? Because there's always going to be some kind of a leakage in the system. But yeah, so in terms of, I think so you're saying is in terms of kind of like sexual liberation to a certain extent, that, you know, when these when the flows are decoded with capitalism, is there a kind of liberatory aspect to this? That was basically kind of like what you're asking, right?
Yeah, I was looking more along the lines of is money being tied with sexual expression due to the object that the ideology is producing, the abstract object that is never really obtainable, where so yes, so like but whereas they're saying we need to express, and rather than try to obtain the object, and that's where money comes in. We're not doing a gift sharing, a potlatch. We're putting making an object in the mythos of whatever this is, the object of our desire, rather than expressing it. So that's what I was at. And then they seem to be saying that the sublation aspect comes in the fact that deterritorialization, that constant production of one tribe and another engaging with one another, seems to offer more stabilization than the monetary system of capitalism, which is just going to produce misery because that object's never going to be obtained. There is no production.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then, yeah, so that is an interesting thing, because I think what they're kind of saying is with capitalism, then you get this whole thing of, well, that's when lack and all this stuff is inserted into this system, where then you have, you know, kind of the abstract object equals X kind of, or even you can think of it in terms of Kant, you have the kind of the abstract transcendental object correlate, object equals X, that can, you know, take a part in your Kantian judgment of all this stuff. And that is going to be similar also with this kind of the transcendental object of capitalism, capital, which is going to be that abstract currency that suddenly becomes this thing that, that can never be satisfied, but yet it's always going to be something kind of radically, there's an alterity relation right there, and definitely, okay, in terms of between the primitive territorial machine with the alliances and the affiliations, that's definitely going to be more stable than the kind of decoding that occurs, the decoding in the axioms that occur with capital. And that's where they're going to take something like, okay, so Marx's, famous saying in or Marx and Engels, I guess, in the Communist Manifesto, all that is solid melts into air. I think they definitely agree with this in the sense that there's this kind of radical destabilization that occurs with capitalism because it decodes all these flows. Although at the same time, there's also this movement that tries to fight against that as much as possible by putting them back into these axioms, which is basically calculations for, profit incentive and all these things. And in terms of libido, whatnot, the thing is that all these things are connected with libido, which I'm not sure how much it almost seems kind of like too abstract to where it doesn't help. But I think just one example would just be something like, okay, having lots of money is a pretty libidinous thing, it seems like, in capitalist society, where having lots of money itself is a libido thing. Whether it's people wanting to okay, I need to express my libido some way, beef it up, I better go get money. How many people I think if you look at people's motivations for money, a lot of times you'll find other motivations kind of inherent in them or under them, which is libidinal. So you're just, okay, so the teenage kid, he's like 17, he's, oh, I'm so horny, I need vaginas and all this. Yeah. What do I do? How do I do this? And you look online, like Jordan Peterson, what do I do? The 12 rules for living or whatever. You're like, oh, looks like I need to get money for this. And if I have these objects, then this is the key. So I think this is already operating under conditions where a lack is inserted into the system, and now you have these kind of strange abstract signifiers of libidinal value at that point that you can never really ultimately obtain. And I think this is where, I've said this multiple times, I think this is where Lacan is just totally right at this point about lack and desire and whatnot. But yeah, those libidinal desires are kind of infested with this whole world of the economy and almost everything we do, it seems like. And I think that's, and it's kind of, Freud's been shat on. And I think to a certain degree, it's almost kind of it shows us how right this book is, basically, that what they always try to use to discredit Freud is the Oedipus complex, because it just seems so ridiculous. But I think what we really need to take is, and I think this is what they're doing. They're almost kind of trying to save the part of Freud that they like. I mean, obviously, why would they want to save the part they don't? And that's really this libidinal economy thing. They're trying to amp up that and connect it really with the economy, where Freud really saw it as, it was a reductive thing where, okay, you've got the economy, all these relations, but those are just symbolic expression substitutes sublations for primary, which is, your infantile relations with the first object of desire, and your first kind of sexual development, oral, anal, genital phase. And then after that, it's this kind of extrapolation from that. Instead, they're going to say, no, it's not this kind of primary, secondary thing. But the economy, that's where the libido is. It's not that it's kind of like back there in my childhood, and now it's just in this sublated, desexualized form. It's there in the economy. Go look. And so I think that's why it's hard to say, almost kind of like how libido is working this way or that way, because it's just so kind of invested in everything. And of course, there's like we have distinctions of, like, oh, this is sexual and this is not, but I think, that's just another kind of privatization of these things, which is why I think they say, okay, even the phallus in Lacan and whatnot is working, the phallus being the organ of, enjoyment, jouissance, that can never be attained. That's the privatization of that, the lack that's inserted in the system, that's on the model of the anus, which is basically just the privatization of these things. It's your responsibility to go get libido, and you don't talk about that in public. That's your own private time. This is private matter. And that becomes another way of kind of, I think, just kind of hiding in a sense, that they're like, people like intentionally, like, it's like a conspiracy or whatever, but there's actually libido and all these things that are not just the things we kind of sequester to the most literal possible, sexuality that we kind of put in these boxes of private time. That instead, if you just even look at it almost like a network kind of way of thinking things, well, the box only exists because of all the connections outside of the box, and it's just so intimately connected with it that it's a distinction that has a function of social repression, in my opinion, but it's not some kind of real distinction in the sense that Deleuze with his Spinoza would call a real distinction. That's beside the point. Anyways, yeah, that's what I'll say about it.
Well, you said just one last question before we go, and it's that I have for everybody, and it's, we talked about these. You said a key phrase that you were talking about. Well, like if we talk about libido, because Nevitt was talking about, okay, well, how does this relate to libido? What is libidinal? Where does libido fit into this notion of this abstract quantity or currency? And you were like, oh, well, libido's kind of ubiquitous. It's this kind of it's this term that is used at least throughout the psychoanalytic tradition and through Deleuze and Guattari for this sort of investment, this flow of desire. But then when in saying it, you prefaced it with saying, I don't want this to get too abstract. And then that gave me a thought. And it was on page 144. On page 144, you have this. Okay, so we know Oedipus is anality. Oedipus, like we talked about the kind of structure of this anality and sublimation. So capitalism and Oedipus, basically, and this is kind of what you were saying was kind of prescient or anticipated by those primitive societies when they say, oh, well, they subjugated industry. They subordinated blacksmiths and merchants to these subservient positions. They saw the pressure of industry. They feared the decoding of flows. Capitalism and Oedipus kind of are these threats of decoding. They threaten with decoding. They threaten to decode. They're like, a capitalism and Oedipus stand and say, we're going to decode your flows if you're not careful. but it's not just decoding flows. There's another way that they put it, and it's on page 144 on the top of page 144. They say this, and this is my last question. They say, what remains then for the making of Oedipus, the structure that is to say as unrealized potentiality? Are we to believe that a universal Oedipus haunts all societies, but exactly as capitalism haunts them? That is to say, as the nightmare of the anxious foreboding of what might result from the decoding of flows and the collective disinvestment of organs, and this is my key thing, the becoming abstract of the flows of desire and the becoming private of the organs. And so what I took, and maybe this is just completely wrong. Maybe this is just, maybe I literally am just misreading. But it seems to me like they're saying that capitalism and Oedipus do threaten to engender the becoming abstract of flows of desire. So my first question is that right? Do capitalism and Oedipus threaten the becoming abstract of flows of desire? And then secondly, aren't flows of desire already abstract? I mean, I'm like talking like in these philosophical terms. Like, if you tell anybody flows of desire, you ever liberated your flow of desire, buddy? And they'd say, "What the hell are you talking about?" Or if you said, if some guy's drinking a beer after work, and you say, "Hey, you're really liberating or codifying, whatever you choose, your flow of desire there, am I right?" And they would say, "What the fuck?" They would be gobsmacked. They would say, "You're talking too abstract. Quit talking in all these abstract terms." You know what I'm saying? Flow of desire seems to me already like kind of an abstraction. And even if it's not necessarily, it seems like it includes abstraction, or the flow of desire would retain abstractions or abstract things. So aren't flows of desire already abstract? That's my question.
So I did miss the last little bit of what you said, but I think I got the gist of the first part of it. Okay, so I think one thing to give the short answer, I would say yes, that capitalism, Oedipus, all these things, they go along with the kind of movement towards abstraction in the sense that it becomes about putting things into abstract quantities through money, which I think that's a pretty concrete thing that you kind of grasp onto, abstract quantity of money. Although there's another kind of slightly more complicated thing, of the sense that, this is a book, it's got a bunch of words, it's got a bunch of concepts, but a lot of distinctions. They love distinctions. 1,000 Plateaus is way worse than that. Way more concepts, way more distinctions, but a lot of the kind of philosophical objects, I think that they're kind of presenting, something like a flow of desire, that in itself that's pretty abstract, right? And I think that can connect with something concrete. You can give concrete examples, but they would definitely agree that there's an ideal abstraction to a philosophical concept like this. So like you could say it would be accurate, I think, or in the sense that Deleuze and Guattari would agree with this, that saying a flow of capital, a flow of desire, which can be capital, that's going to be something abstract. And they're going to say that philosophically, we usually use these distinctions. We talk about like these ideal objects, but then when it comes to real things, they're almost always going to be mixes. So a lot of times you'll notice they think in terms of poles between different things. Like there's a pole of this over here and that, and tendencies in a spectrum, a continuum. So usually the thing is the ideal kind of object that they'll say is this or that. Those are going to be kind of the end of the spectrum, but then actual things are going to be in between there. There's real things are going to be mixes. And so one thing they say, there's no pure nomad. is kind of one example. So I think that shows that the idea of the nomad, even that is to a certain degree abstract. But then there's still real nomads, but they still participate in this other thing, which is kind of a settlement culture, more or less settled culture with a more relatively metastable base with a stock of seeds or food or whatever, kind of something different from a nomad. So I think that's kind of the basic idea there of kind of their kind of meta philosophy between this idea of philosophy works with concepts, creates concepts, makes distinctions, but a lot of these are ideal and abstract, but that's good because there's a power to abstraction. Abstraction's awesome. In fact, most philosophy, the problem with it is it's not abstract enough. It's just talking a bunch of empirical crap. And instead, we need to think mega abstractly, and then another movement kind of come back down. Let's see, Nevitt, I think you're the only one here that's been around since Whitehead. So
Plane taking off and coming back
the
down.
flight of ideas and imagination, and then there's one movement where you fly off into imagination land, but eventually your plane's got to land, otherwise you're just gonna be flying around for a while. And so that's
I've got this example I deploy a lot, maybe overuse it, but it was triggered by my daughter's majoring in fine arts, and she had lots of abilities, or she could have become an engineer or a scientist or something, but she just didn't. I mean, she made very good grades and all that stuff, but she didn't find it interesting. What she really was passionate about was art, and specifically about pottery and and that kind of stuff. And so people would just ask her the same question probably they ask people like who are getting a PhD in or master's in philosophy: what the hell is that good for? And when they say that, what they mostly mean is, how are you going to make money doing that? And so what I began think about, like, take the art world. If everything wasn't reduced to monetary value, then I think you could say, I think, hopefully I'm using these terms correctly, there are flows of desire, aesthetic desire, that have to do with appreciation of beauty or appreciation of whatever, whatever's happening in the art world. But what's happened is everything has become reduced to a monetary value. And so now no one, you hear this among musicians a lot and artists, what they really want to do is they want to produce this kind of work, but this other kind of work is more marketable. And so they can make a living producing this kind of music when really what they'd rather do is do this other stuff. And so their sort of real desire is to produce this other kind of music and to be involved in this world of musicians and people who appreciate it and so on. So there's all these aesthetic flows of desire, but because the capitalist machine is dominating everything, then in the capitalist machine, none of that stuff has any value except monetary value. That's it. And so, in fact, in the capitalist machine, nothing has any other kind of value than monetary value. That is the only value. There are no aesthetic values. There are no moral values, right? Because you just do what gets you the best profit. There are just no other kind of values. There's hardly even, for a lot of people, even relational values, because it's all about economic value. And that's the way I'm thinking about this of decoding of flows, is there are these. And, like Hunter corrected something I said there, it's not like there aren't these organs, sexual organs and aesthetic organs and all this kind of stuff that are kind of trying to work their thing out. But they're all sort of being pushed down. All those flows and values are being pushed down under the weight of the capitalist machine, in which every single thing, human beings, aesthetic values, moral values, cats, dogs, trees, everything, penises, anuses, everything is reduced to how much does it cost? or how much money can it produce? And so that's, I don't know if that's accurate, but that's the way, I mean, if that's what he means by decoding, that capitalism decodes everything by reducing everything to just quantifiable monetary value. I mean, I think finally that kind of makes sense to me.
We did it. We figured out the problem with capital and Oedipus, and now we can finally defeat the Leviathan.
We did. We reached the abstraction level of solution.
Okay, so in difference repetition, so being itself is problematic in that it produces problems, and there's a whole structure of problems, questions, imperatives, and then they become actualized in solutions, but those solutions are always partial to the problems. So basically problems are fundamental. So you can never really exhaust problems because being itself is problematic. So nope, we still have problems. Only temporary solutions, partial ones. So
We'll get it next time with your guidance, Chase.
we can break through. We can go to the other side of capital. We can go to universal schizophrenia. I think we can make it together if we can collectively invest our organs together. Let's create a collective butthole.
Well,
we should just carve all our assholes out and like put them on a big table and connect them together somehow.
yum, like the human centipede, but not human, just the centipede of butts. There you go. That's a good one.
I think I feel like we're really getting to the schizophrenia part of this book.
We are doing good.
Yeah.
Also, I have to say, if I say hello there to you guys, I feel like someone at some point needs to say General Kenobi to me. I feel like that's just an expected ritual. So, okay, Ripley got it. Thank you. I love you guys.
Yeah, okay, last thought before I want to leave because I have to pee so bad. The part about the collective anuses reminded me of The Simpsons when Marge is going to school and her mean older sisters are like, there's only one big toilet and they make you all go at the same time. And she gets really nervous and freaked out. She's like, oh God, I can't do that. How am I going to make it to the toilet? Oh, that's going to be one of the worst parts. The whole day she's dreading this communal toilet. I would also dread that. I don't want that. Anyway.
No joke. I had second generation Russian immigrant grandparents who would only flush the toilet when you had to poop. So when I was a kid, they would all say, if you have to pee, don't flush. You would go in there and it was rancid. And every time I conveniently had to poop because I just couldn't do it. Like it was just like, because they felt that was wasting water and that was good well water and you never flush. And I was just like, oh my God, Baba.
So they're really exercising a collective stream of urine then.
Yeah, and yeah.
If it's yellow, let it mellow. If it's brown, flush it down.
Oh, yeah.
See that right there? That is a coding of a flow of desire.
I love it. I love it.
Great, that's a code. All right, we did it.
Actually, so I guess you were decoding it, or you were overcoding it, or I don't know.
I don't know.
God.
I flush that toilet every time.
I flush my toilet because I'm an authoritarian. Okay, and I prefer a clean John. All right?
Well, I do look at my poo. I follow Zizek. So
I'm the despot. Yeah, I'm the German pontificator. You know.
This has been rousing. I always appreciate you guys' company. Thank you so much and the insight.
Yeah, all right. This has been really good. I've had a good one, but yeah, now I have to pee so bad, and I'm gonna go privatize my flow right in a minute here. But other than that, this has been great. Absolutely stellar. I've had a great time. I think it's good. I can't wait for the next one.
All right, I'm gonna go to a liquor store here in Atlanta, I think.
Oh, that sounds fun. Yeah, hey, have fun in Atlanta. That sounds fun.
Will do. Hoochie coochie on the Calhoochie.
Yeah, go have a hoochie.
The fried chicken there is amazing, and if you get a chance, pour honey on it because they make it salty and they make it really good salty, and they always soak. If you get a really good fried chicken place, they'll soak it in buttermilk so it's real juicy. And a good juicy fried chicken with honey is like, oh, chef's kiss. It's amazing.
Style thing.
does sound
Yeah, it
quite
is,
good.
and they do good chicken and waffles. 'Cause
Do
it's
do.
salty.
I do.
Do the codifying. You cannot. But anyway, have fun.
All right.
Bye.
Anyway, all right.
See ya.
Bye. All right. Bye, y'all. See ya.